Hi everyone, welcome to another live today, whilst we're still in lockdown. We're here in Auckland anyway. Amanda, welcome back, Amanda Betts. I was
Kia
doing a bit more
ora.
Kia ora. I was doing a bit more digging about you, and somebody called you a Kiwi hero. How amazing is that?
That's
And does
amazing. I'd
anybody,
love to know who that was.
I'll find out. I'll go back and have a look. You're an entrepreneur, model, mother. You were abused when you were younger, and you were told that you were worthless, and you left home at 15 and created an incredible life for yourself. And you're on many missions, but one of your missions is to make sure that young people feel believe in themselves and have self-belief.
Absolutely. Definitely with young people and how to, really what I do, Bridget, is I help people heal their trauma. I help them turn their crap or I used to say shit, their shit into fertilizer, and to
Yep.
use what happened to them and their experiences to help catapult and create and sustain their future. And of course, my focus is very much on young people, especially at risk and vulnerable. But I'm also really passionate about, affluent young people who are really stuck where they have everything and, the high expectations and what's happening with them and their suicidal ideations, their mental health, their depression, anxiety, defining the difference between personality disorders and those clusters, because again, if you've got a really sore tooth, there's no point going to the podiatrist, right?
No.
So there's a really big difference between mental health as opposed to personality. And I really can't get my head around the word disorders, but like challenges or quirks. And so, and then what's happened is I've ended up I'm coaching people, I'm coaching women as well, both in helping
Parents.
to build their confidence. Parents, definitely right there for parents. As kind of the nutcracker to make change and then to hand them on to people that can help them according to what their challenges are. So how you deal with a woman who's just gone through a divorce, she has her business that she's trying to protect, she's also got her kids that she's trying to look after, and she's having a crappy relationship, loaded with anger, which is why we're talking about this today with her ex, versus a woman who's a solo parent on the bones of her bum. She's got 2 children. She has a job that she hates. It's like how you deal with those 2 different, people will be different, but
Different
the
strategies.
trauma is the same. What works with when you've been betrayed, you've been betrayed. You need to deal with the betrayal. It doesn't matter how that betrayal came about. And so what I'm always doing is getting below the surface and the situations and the people
Ripping
and
off those
learning.
band-aids. Hey?
Damn straight. Yeah, damn straight. Unfortunately, and throwing a bit of whiskey on them and then holding up the truth mirror while we're doing it, because what they've been doing is not working for them,
No,
which obviously led us to today.
Yeah, that's right. So if you've just joined us, we are going to be talking about you and your anger with a focus on exes, your ex, and also your children. So, Amanda, let's first talk about people being able to anticipate their anger triggers.
That's a really big thing, right? Because obviously what happens, the first thing that I'd like to say to everybody, that anger is a natural emotion. It is so natural to get angry, right? And I think that there's this false kind of idea that we're not allowed to be angry or we have to control our anger. I mean, when the mountain's blowing up, you don't try and control it, do you? You've got to let it run its course, right? And I've been down in Ruapehu when the rocks were all coming up and out, and the laha was coming out, and there was smoke, and and we get like that as humans, where we become human volcanoes. And then
we
quite
need to
often what happens,
don't we have to say to ourselves, it's okay to be feeling like this.
absolutely, it is okay to feel angry. What the challenge really comes in, it's like, if you go back to that volcano, right, is when you're trying to put a lid on it, which is only ever going to make you more angry. So, the first thing that I really want to get home and really drive home is that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be happy. Anger is just an emotion. And I say just, right? And it can be managed, but it can't be managed in the middle of it. If you were in the middle of being happy and someone said, hey, control your happiness, you can't be happy, right? Because I'm not happy, so I want you to control your happiness. I think you'd tell them where to go, right? Yeah. If you're in the middle of your sadness, if your child, if something's happened to your child and they are really, really sad, they got bullied, they're really upset, they've got past the point of anger, they're now really, really sad, right? You're not going to tell them to stop being sad. Hey, come on, pick yourself up from the bootstraps, stop being sad, right? Why are we doing that with anger? Why are we doing it with anger with ourselves? With our exes, with our bosses, children, parents, whatever.
Everybody.
We're not giving ourselves this safe place to be angry. So that's the first myth I'd like to bust.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that you're not going to get anywhere by trying to deal with the situation right there and then. You actually need to walk away, have a bit of time out, and then discuss it. If we're talking about, exes, for example, actually have a plan too. Don't just go back into the escalation again. If you have some time out, you actually need to have a plan moving forward to be able to combat whatever issues you have got between the two.
I like to call them strategies, right? Because, plan's one of those words where you have a best laid plan and then it can all go undone because you have a plan, right? So, like with exes, for example, right? One of the most important things. So, what I like to do is go back before we because we'll wrap around this, right? The first thing that we need to do with anger, first of all, is just let it go, okay? Because if you try to stop it halfway through, you can't, right? If you've got that split second, and the thing is that obviously our thoughts, are driven quite often by our feelings, right? So what we think is what we feel, okay? So the thoughts come up first. So we get a feeling, and the feelings is like, you can feel the triggers, right? And then the thoughts, they come up and then bang, we come out, right? Once it comes out, you know what? Just let the lid go. Let it all go. Let it all come out, right? And as soon as you get a breath, because you have to breathe, take that breath, right? And then because it'll just keep on wanting to come out, So the thing is, what we've got to do is first of all, let the anger out, right? Because once it comes out, it's out. Okay, great. Then we can see what's happening. The next part, you do need to remove yourself from the situation straight away, right? Whether that you have to say, I have to hang up now, that it doesn't matter. I have to hang up now. I have to go into my room now, whatever it might need to be. You then need to remove yourself from the situation as quickly as you can, right? Then you need to actually sit with it. You need to just let it all come out, right? On your own, okay? And when Isaac, with my son, when he used to get really angry, I used to say to him, hey, look, you can be as angry as you need to be, but you can't be angry in this space right now, right? Yeah. So you need to go into your room and be as angry as you need to be, right? And in his room, he was allowed to swear as much as he liked from a really young age. It's very funny to hear a little boy going, effing, and they quite often just say the same three things over again. It's usually, bloody, S and F, right? And but just let it all come out, and it was okay for him to do so, right? And then once he was settled, then it was like giving him the space, right? To give him the space to come out when he was ready, not when I wanted him to be. Yeah. Now, the reason I'm telling you, and I'm referring to a child, is because we are so much more kinder to children, right, than what we are to our exes, to what we are to our parents or our partners or, you know, our siblings or our friends or workmates or whatever. When it comes to children, there is that softer side to us. So I use the analogy of my child, right? And then once they're ready to come out, what we've got to do is we've got to look beyond the surface emotion that anger is, right? Why am I angry? So it comes down to questions, okay? So it's the W's, like what happened, right? Really,
Yeah.
what happened? Okay, really going through, and because
Why
when you're
and
angry,
where? All of that.
you've got a narrative, exactly. What happened, right?
Mm.
Then how did it get to that point?
I think people should
another
write
one.
down. They should track their anger. They do file notes, and they can. I think it's good to assess your findings and look for patterns.
Yes,
You know, what
looking for
triggers?
patterns is
Yeah.
so important. But again, we're jumping the gun a little bit. The first thing we've got to do is we've got to ask ourselves those questions. Why am I so angry? Why am I so angry? What actually happened here? What happened? Well, you know, mum said this and then I said that and then I did this and I didn't do that and da, 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 right? So you're then rehashing what actually happened. Because sometimes when you really look at what happened, right, you kind of go, oh, actually, she did try to say blah, 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 but I didn't hear it, right? When you kind of recount it in your mind.
Yeah.
So you need to go through that narrative in your story. Then you
And
go,
obviously, as we
how did it
said,
get to that point?
yeah, and as we said, it's got to be done when the heat is out of it. It's after
Take the fire
the
out.
argument's taken a place. Yep. Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. This is when you're downloading, and it's so important to download, because you know what happens quite often, Bridget, and when people need to download, especially yourself, give yourself that time. Say to yourself, I am not doing anything for the next half an hour except for processing these emotions. I give half an hour to the news, or I give half an hour to a shower or a run or making food or whatever. Give half an hour to you, right? Where you're not doing anything, you're not distracting yourself, because that otherwise what you're then doing is catapulting yourself out of the emotions. So what often happens with anger, we need to go, why do I feel so wounded? Right? Why did I get so angry? Why do I feel so wounded? Because behind anger is hurt. Right?
Yeah.
And then what we've got to do is we've got to identify what that hurt is. Is it sadness? Is it disappointment? Is it betrayal? Is
Resentment?
Resentment. Is it smashed hopes? Is it regret? Is it shame? So the anger is the surface emotion. That tells you that there's a problem, right? Below the anger, we've got to identify what it is. I don't feel heard, for example. That's a big one, where I don't feel heard. No matter what I say, it's not good enough. So then what's happening is like, well, no matter what I do, it's not good enough. And then you go, I'm not good enough. Right? And then sometimes you direct the anger to yourself. Why did I do this again? Why do I keep doing this? And that's quite often where too many people stop, Bridget. They stop at that point and they're not actually going through the whole process and finding out where it came from. So then the next best thing that you can do is, once you identify what it is, so you pick one of those ones. Is it, I'm, you know, no matter what I do,
a lot of couples are very resentful of each other.
Right. So resentful. So we're looking at resentful. Then the next thing, you got to ask the questions again. Why do I feel so resentful? What did he or she do that makes me feel resentful?
She left me because, and I thought the relationship was fine.
Right. Okay. Then you go back in again. So it's like, right. So where did you miss something, right? You're resentful because why are you resentful to them? They
you haven't picked up on you haven't been able to pick up on the issues in the relationship, or you've just been in denial about them. Another emotion,
right?
You know,
right, exactly. And so then you go into denial, right? So start looking and say, okay, well, where was I denying? Where were red flags coming up? And that quite often happens, right? Like an affair is a classic example. An affair is a classic example. It's like, I thought everything was fine. It's like, well, what do you define as fine? Instead of looking at what that person did and having an affair and being just angry at them, if you then go back and go, okay, where did I miss it? Where did I miss that? Where were the red flags? Where was I ignoring red flags? Where was I ignoring my own intuition? All of a sudden, you're not angry anymore because you're asking questions about what you missed, and you're starting to take accountability for your part, right? So it's like, okay, I'm really resentful because they had an affair on me, right? Well, why do I think they had an affair? Let's get honest here, right? And the truth is, we're not very good with the truth.
No.
We're not very good with the truth. As soon as it starts getting uncomfortable, as soon as it starts feeling like a carrot around an orifice that's not our mouth, we then start to do anything to catapult ourselves out of that discomfort. Because as humans, we are not comfortable with being uncomfortable, but we have to learn to become comfortable about being uncomfortable.
Absolutely,
being comfortable in discomfort.
Angry is normal. It is a normal emotion to have, and people find that
and it's natural.
Struggle with it. And I think
it's because they're never diving below the surface. Because again, remember that iceberg. Everybody's all thought leaderships and entrepreneurs, we all know it, right? About the iceberg. You see the tip of the iceberg, there's the ocean, and then there's all of this iceberg underneath, right? So if that's the anger up top that you can see, you can guarantee that there are a whole bunch of emotions underlying that. And you have to decide, well, how deep do you want to go to get to the bottom of it? Because the fact of the matter is that quite often what happens with anger, right? If we do not deal with our anger, when we get angry, we release a whole bunch of adrenaline through our bodies, right? The brain releases chemicals. It releases adrenaline. It releases, what's the other one? Cortisol, right? And then our body seizes up. Our body, we physically, fight, flight, or freeze, right? So that's what we're doing, right? We either can do nothing, and when we're really, really angry in our body and it's flushing through our bodies, if the body doesn't use that somehow in some sort of constructive way, then it gets stored. Right. So what happens is a lot of people, they might, and they blow. And there's both you've got to know whether you're an under-controlled person or an over-controlled person with your anger. So it's like, for me, for example, I'm very slow to anger, but I can keep it and keep it and keep it and keep it. And if I don't deal with it, especially when I was younger, I don't do that these days because I'm able to get below the anger. I know what to do. I have the skills, and I put in the time and effort and blood, sweat and tears and a shit ton of money to learn the skills of managing my anger, because emotions are skills. Jim Quick, Kwik, one of the best brain experts in the world, said it. Emotions are skills. And when I learned that, I was like, that's awesome.
It's managing them.
If I can learn how to manage this. I'm not managing it right now, but I can learn how to manage it. But the first thing is we've got to get below and find out, right, what the emotion is that is driving that up. So say, for example, I've got a really good analogy with this one. If you see little fish on the surface, right? You can see fish on the surface, and and let's call them the angry fish. Right? They're angry and they're all, like this. That there's some bigger fish that are chasing those little fish up, right? What are those bigger fish? Then below those bigger fish, there's a monster in the deep that's chasing those bigger fish up, right? And if we do not get down to the monster within us and actually really be truthful and honest, and that's why we need to create that safe space for ourselves where no one interrupts us, where we can just calm down and we can go into this place and find out, first of all, what the bigger fish that are driving the angry fish up. So you might be angry, you might be feeling resentful, right? Then you have to be careful when you start directing the anger at yourself. I should have known better. I should have seen it coming. Why didn't I make the move? Why didn't you get the courage to leave then, before he had an affair or she had an affair? Right, for example, and we've got to go through, and then so if we sort of turn around and go, okay, well, why did they have an affair? Well, I'm really busy at work all the time. My partner never sees me. I'm not interested in sex. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm trying to deal with business, and I'm trying to deal with the kids, and I'm trying to keep myself mentally and physically well and fit. And well, it's no surprise that your partner, right, had an affair on you because you've not been present in the relationship. Right. And when that then happens and you go, I'm really angry because they had an affair on me. I'm sticking to this through thick and thin. I'm doing my best.
Rather than having a light bulb moment in terms of actually where it comes from, because, it takes two to tango in a relationship. It's not just one person's fault. You know, it never is.
Never,
You've
never,
always
never,
got to
never.
look in your own backyard of
Mm.
what are the issues that you've going on. Now, one thing is that, you know, when we're feeling wronged, we're angry. And then comes a desire for aggression.
Or
This is people,
justice.
yeah,
Or
people
revenge.
act on their anger. And, you know, people can actually, it's not about managing your anger, it's managing your aggression. It's, you can take control, you can get better at managing it by focusing on your aggressive thinking and your speech, don't you think?
And actions, you know, like,
Yeah.
you know, and again, you know, look at passive aggressive behavior, for example. You know, passive aggressive people don't have a tendency to get angry, and it goes back into that under controlled, which means when people explode like big volcanoes go all over the place, or the crock pot, you know, the steaming, where if you don't release that steam as it's coming up, then you're going to blow the lid sky high. So first of all, you need to know what you are, and you need to know what your partner is, and then you need to accept what you are, and you have to accept what your partner is. And quite often you will find that, you know, it's not often that you have two under controlled people, like two, you know, angry people that don't have control of their emotions and they're angry at each other all the time. They just can't sustain that kind of relationship. And vice versa, the over controlled, where they just brew and brew and brew and brew and brew and brew, and then all of a sudden they blow. Right? So you need to know what you are, and you need to know what they are. Because again, the coping mechanisms for the under controlled is completely different to the coping mechanisms for the over controlled. So it's about acceptance, right? So that's really, really important first and foremost. And then secondly, as I said, if you actually go down and go through everything, so we've got resentment at the top, right? So we've got anger, then we've got resentment straight under that. And as I said, the example is your partner has an affair, you feel like they let you down, you said death till death do you part, blah, 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 but you've never been available or present, right? It starts to become harder to be angry at that other person, because you're like, okay, hold on a tick here. I have to take responsibility for the part that I played. I can't control them and their choices, right? They deceived me, right? They deceived me. But did I give them any choice? I was never there. I didn't have sex with them. I didn't engage with them. You know, I was on my phone when we were at dinner together, right? Because I was constantly working and trying to manage the kids. And it doesn't matter that they were your best intentions and you did the best that you could. And, you know, you're a good person, right? It's like, instead of just like kind of looking at that person and going, I'm angry at them, you need to start, if you really want to learn how to manage your aggression and how to prevent yourself getting to that place again, you've got to do the internal work and take responsibility and accountability and make changes to what you need to make changes to.
Yeah, 100%. And stop the storytelling. You know,
the narratives.
The narratives and the nuances, and they can just absolutely escalate beyond control. You know, how we habitually think determines how we habitually feel, isn't it?
Absolutely, I know. Isn't that a goodie? I love that one. And the other thing too that I think is really important, you know, like those are actual tools as to how to manage your anger. You've got to track the emotions down. And if you don't want to do the work, and if you keep catapulting yourself out of it, right, then it's not going to change until you do. So when, you know, if you're constantly getting in a state of anger, you've either got to change your environment or you've got to change you. Right. And so because, you know, like, so abstinence is not the answer, you know, so that's one that I really want to say to you guys. Do not get sucked into the fact that abstinence, if I don't speak to them, it's going to be okay and I won't need to be triggered.
It's not going to go away.
Solve the problem. No, because there's something really important that I want to say before we wrap up this one too, Bridgette, that's so important for people to hear, right? So let's say an incident happens, okay, and let's say when you were young, you were betrayed somehow. So for me, it's really easy. I was betrayed because I was sexually abused, for example, right? And you can look at that trauma. So there's the betrayal. Now, because I was 8 years old, I wasn't able to deal with my emotions, right? I didn't have the skills, and I didn't know what to do. I was 8 years old. You know, I couldn't tell my mum. You know, I had to keep the secret. So I got this big thing about betrayal, and I wrapped it up. And let's just imagine that I wrapped it up because I couldn't cope with it, and I stuck it in the freezer, in my own internal freezer, and I froze it so that I didn't have to deal with it. So I numbed myself out of it. I was 8 years old, so I didn't take drugs to numb myself or have sex with other people or shop or drink alcohol or, you know, commit crime. I couldn't numb that betrayal emotion and what it did to me. I had a multi-sensory experience that was to do with what I saw, what I heard, what I smelt, what I touched, you know, what I was watching, what was happening to my body, you know, how his body felt against mine. All of those, it's a multi-sensory experience, right, that I had, and I froze it, right? And then what happened is then my mother betrayed me, you know, when I was 15. Right? She made me leave school at 15 years old with only 2 years high school. It was betrayal again. And I was like, whoa, okay. So that betrayal, again, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't cope with it. So a different situation, different person, stuck it back because it was betrayal, stuck it in the freezer, right? Then I got betrayed again and again and again. Now the betrayal carried on and on and on. There comes a point, right, where and certainly as a young adult, when I started having intimate relationships, right, a guy would touch me a certain kind of way, right, and it would make me feel dirty. Now, it was a completely normal thing that was happening in the relationship, a completely normal part of sex. But because I hadn't dealt with the trauma and the betrayal, that situation triggered me. Right? Then I'd hear certain songs and I'd see certain programs that kept on being triggers for me for this old betrayal that I had. Now, if we cut to, and it's never happened to me, but let's pretend that it did, we're talking about anger and resentment. I then have a partner who then deceives me. He has an affair on me, or she has an affair on me, because as we know, I had a wife for 16 years as well. I had a husband for 10 and a wife for 16. I've got really good tools from both sides of the fence, right? And they deceived me. That then goes into my betrayal, right? So my betrayal, and instead of dealing with my betrayal, I'm angry and I'm resentful and I'm hurt and I'm wounded, right? And I think it's about that person and what they've done and what they've said or not done or not said sometimes, as the case may be, right? But it's the betrayal. Then, of course, I go to pack it into the freezer, right? But the freezer is full, and the freezer is my nervous system. It's my nervous system. It's leaking out of my nervous system into my heart, into my body. I'm getting sick, into my mind. I'm thinking toxic, sickly, angry thoughts, right? Which is happening inside of me, and my freezer packs out.
Because you haven't emptied the freezer. Whenever happens,
because I've never emptied the freezer. I did not deal with that betrayal. Did not deal with that betrayal. So every time I get triggered with anything to do with betrayal, it could be somebody gossiping about you. It could be your boss promised you a promotion and then they decided to give it to somebody else. It's betrayal. It could be that you're running your own business, your employee, then all of a sudden packed up and went to your biggest competitor. Betrayal. So every time you experience betrayal of any description, you will be catapulted into your trauma. Now, by the time you've done this with several experiences, with betrayal, with worthiness, that's a really big one at the bottom of a lot of our emotions. And anger is, I must not have been good enough. So if we look at that affair and that resentment at the top, then we've got revenge and justice. If we do not deal with it, we're looking for revenge, we're looking for justice. We have shame, regret, denial, all of that, you know, all of those emotions that we feel. We've also got, you know, I am not good enough. It must have been something about me, right? And then we'd lump that in there. I am not worthy, or I am not good enough, or I need to be better, or it goes on and on and on.
It's even
And of
exhausting
course,
thinking about it, what you would look like, doesn't it?
I know. If you actually looked in your freezer, if you actually really unpacked your freezer, it would be terrifying. That's why it cost me $40,000 and 6 years of really extensive CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, with the psychotherapist, because I had this whole delusion that therapy was about, digging up your past. And that's why I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do any therapy, right? Because I'm like, fuck that for a game of cards, excuse my French. Screw that for a game of cards. I do not want to deal with my past because it is too painful and too difficult. And I've spent all of these years, popping it in the freezer and dealing with it and functioning, perfectly functioning, right? And then then all of a sudden we find that we're addicts. We're on the wine, and we're on the sex with other people, or we're on the drugs, or we're on the shopping, or the social media addiction, or whatever. We become these addicts, these angry addicts that are never actually dealing with the deep trauma that happened to us, that then gets triggered in our future, so that's the really big part. If you really want to manage yourself, and it's like, rather than focusing on managing your anger or managing even your aggression, right, you first of all need to identify your
100%.
pain. You need to identify your pain. Forget about the other person and what they've done. They've just been a mirror for you. It's an opportunity for you to see what you need to work on. You identify your wounds. If you're wounded, the quicker it cuts through you and the more it hurts you, the older it is and the more it belongs to you, right?
The more that
so when it cuts through,
yep,
absolutely. And you do, with the ice pick, you got to get in there and pick it out.
Right.
And it's hard work and it's painful. It's so painful. But what will then happen is, instead of being angry and responding in an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff kind of way, you're actually doing preventative measures, and you're working out what makes you angry, what makes you sad and disappointed, and what makes you feel betrayed. And then you can start going, okay, this person is a serial cheater. Do not get into a relationship with them. They've never done more than 3 years in their entire life. They've cheated on past partners. What makes you think that you're going to be so special and different to break that? They've got healing and wounding to do. So you don't get into something with that kind of person in the first place. So then you don't need to then get angry at them for doing what is so natural and normal to them.
Yeah. So Amanda, thank you. We've spent half an hour talking about that and anger, and we haven't even touched the surface. So
no, we haven't scratched the surface.
We haven't even. So I found this wonderful quote, which I think is very apt, and it is, being full of positive emotions leaves no room for hate.
And
that comes later on, once the freezer's empty of those negative.
I think I love that about the positive with regards to hate. But what I would really invite people to do more than anything is just really just have the courage, take the time, invest the money and the effort and the energy to actually get below the anger and look at those bigger fish, chasing those little angry fish up. And then when you've got the courage, start to deal with the monster.
Yeah. And you would just become such a better person in so many ways. And there'll be, your new life and new beginnings, and will be so different for you.
Yes. One really quick one that I forgot, a really great analogy that I just want to send over for that sort of instant thing, when you're starting to get into anger, because like what starts to happen is you start going, oh, I'm starting to get angry. Okay, you can start to take measures and nip it in the point at that point when, because that happens, it's going to happen to us for the rest of our lives. We're going to have things to be angry about, right? So if we don't learn how to deal with our emotions, then we're just going to be great big volcanoes that ruin relationships wherever we go, right? So the choice is yours. You don't have to do the work if you don't want to, but it's a really good idea to do so. So when you're starting to get to that point, I like to think of it as like playing conversational tennis with somebody, right? You can start to feel it when the game starts, you know, like, hey, you're playing a game of tennis and everything's fine. When the game starts to sort of heat up, and the other person, you can feel when the other opponent, whoever it might be, opponent, let's say it's an ex, it's a really good one, right? It's like we are playing a game of tennis with them. We're playing tennis with everybody every single day, all of our lives. And we will do until the day that, you know, they scatter our ashes to the wind or throw dirt on our box, right? So we're playing tennis with people, and it's conversational tennis. And you can feel when your opponent starts hitting shitty shots to you. You can feel it. You can see it. It's like, whoa, that was crappy. Why did you do that? Right? Quite often what we're doing is like, well, I'm going to get you, and you go, you know, bang, I'm going to give you a dirty shot. And they go, great, right, fine. Well, I'm going to get you. And then they hit back a dirty shot. And then all of a sudden, all you're doing is playing a game of dirty shots. You cannot walk away from the court with your ex when you've got children. You cannot just kind of go, I'm sick of this tennis game. I give up and throw your racket like John McEnroe and walk off the court. You can't do that. You have to play tennis with them. So when they play tennis with, and when they shoot a shitty shot at you, you don't respond to it with a shitty shot in return. No. You turn around and say, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware, but that was a really crappy shot. We have to play tennis together because we've got kids. Do you want to have a better game of tennis, or do you just want to play a crappy game of tennis where I give you a crappy shot and you give me a crappy shot, right? Like, and if you do that analogy, straight away you're going to stop them and kind of go, hold on a tick. That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, and reflecting on the ramifications if you continue in that mindset and those behaviours.
Absolutely, yeah, because you can't stop them from giving you a crappy shot, but you do not have to give them a crappy shot back. And sometimes the best thing that you can do, especially when you've got a really ignorant, you know, bloody so small-minded, wounded, you know, because especially when you look at your exes, they are often, you know, for women, you know, in a lot of cases, look at the little wounded boy or the little wounded girl in them. They're quite often very wounded children in adult bodies, and they've not done a lot of the work and the building. You know, they've just gone from this to that, and they don't know how to do the work. You are going to have to play tennis with your exes when you've got children involved. So
whether you like
whether you like it or not. So one of the best pieces of advice that I can give you is to stop it before it gets to that point of anger, wherever you can. When you get angry, forgive yourself.
Yep, there are things you don't need to communicate about. You don't have to answer every text. Just things about children, and there's a certain way, as we talked about last week, Biff, that otherwise you are just sending yourself into a stressful orbit that you don't want to be. You'll be feeling like you're in that relationship.
It's a black hole. Yeah. It is. A stressful orbit called the black hole. And nobody likes to be sucked into the black hole, because that is a really dark place, right? And it is your choice. You can't control your ex, but you can control you. You know, so every now and then call them out on the game and say, hey, that was a really crappy shot. That was a low blow. You did not need to call me that name, right? Like, really, you know, it's like, hit the ball nicely back to them.
Yeah. So the one takeaway, people, if there's nothing else that you learn from this Facebook Live, is no crappy shots.
Yeah. Well, it's I think, you know, sometimes some really good strategically based shots that are difficult for them to get to, that stretch them, is really good. But no unnecessary crappy shots, because otherwise you're just destroying the game, and then they're going to send the balls over there. Then once you place a crappy shot, you put it into their court. They've got no choice really but to send you a crappy shot back, usually.
And it gets faster and faster and larger and larger.
And nastier and nastier. And then, of course, you can't get on with the rest of the game of life, because this is only one tennis game in your life.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will be back next week with another. Well, thank you, Amanda. You're very insightful. It's been a lot to think about. And it's been brilliant.
Yeah, so I know we always deep dive, but I just don't want to go around the surface, because, you know, that's clearly not working for a lot of people. So, you know, I'm glad that you give me the space to deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So,
thank you so much, Bridgette,
for your comments. Oh, pleasure. And contact us. We've got our details if you want any more advice or to have a chat to us in the future. But we'll be back next week, next Wednesday. Wednesdays, 12 o'clock is where we will be here. Same channel, same time.
Will. Yep, cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Honey.
Bye.
Bye. Ka kite.